Okay, what we're going to be talking about today is the process of transoceanic empire building. So make sure you guys have your notes as you're following along with this. Make sure you're adding to it, filling in the blanks as we move forward. Um, in transoceanic empires, it's a really fancy name for a really simple process. So throughout time, beginning, I would say maybe end of time period 3 through time period 4 and 5, Europeans are going out, they're exploring their areas, and they're trading in new areas. And for the longest time, they are, as this map shows, they're kind of bouncing from coast to coast. They're not really going towards the interior. If you follow these trade routes, they're following the coast and just sort of bouncing around. Over time, though, it's going to shift from these trade-based port cities that we were used to before um, to what's going to become full-scale takeovers of cultural life of these areas, of political life of these areas, and these non-industrialized regions are going to come under the control of your imperialist European nations. They're going to become colonies of these nations. And so what you'll see here on this map, we've got a few different regions. It's kind of confusing to see. But we're going to talk about some things like sphere of influence, which is what we're going to see here in like Ming China, and to some extent, mostly Ming China is going to be our sphere of influence, which means it's kind of a low-grade colony. Europeans are trying to exert their influence over the economy, but they're not trying to totally dominate. It's a lesser colony. The orange, though, is going to show us our full-fledged colonies. This means that Europeans are going to they're going to show their political influence, and usually this is done through a military force. And with transoceanic empire buildings, what we're doing here is we are going out and building empires over the seas. We're not building empires like Napoleon and the Romans and the Han did. We're going out and you're conquering your neighbors, and Napoleon marches through Europe one country at a time. We're not concerned with our land neighbors. Rather, transoceanic empires is basically you build over the seas. So Europeans are going to jump around. They're going to go to Africa, South America, Canada, Australia, South Asia. It's all going to come under control of the Europeans. And the main areas that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks is going to be through Asia and Africa. So, how does this process of empire building begin? Well, it begins with industrialization. Industrialization equals power for several reasons. Goods are made faster. Goods are made more quickly. This increased output is going to make our militaries more powerful. And it's not really like the weapons are that much more advanced, but it's that you can get them faster, you can get them replaced faster, you have better supply lines, and you have more of them. An increased output is going to lead to a more powerful military. You have stronger supply lines. We talked before about with the industrialization, it leads to this process of interchangeable parts, so it's easier to repair what you do have, and all of this is going to make our militaries more effective and more efficient. So, thanks to our fossil fuels, we have this huge amount of productive capacity, which is going to be used to fill the political power, the military might of these industrialized nations. And these non-industrialized nations are, quite frankly, shocked by this process. This happens so fast. I mean, this happens within a couple generations that countries industrialize. Within usually 2 generations, you go from a non-industrialized to a fully industrialized nation. So the ones that don't adjust fast enough to this shifting global power find themselves being dominated by the others. So these countries and empires that didn't industrialize in the beginning found out through this process that they were weak, and they were very surprised by this huge shift in power. And we'll see this as this unfolds in areas like Russia, in the Ottoman empires, as we move forward, they're going to be shocked by the power of an industrialized nation. Okay, so these non-industrialized nations kind of give Europeans a good reason to conquer them. Um, Industrialization gives us a need for raw materials for our factories. No longer are Europeans going out and looking for luxury goods, which is what they were doing in time period 4. Before industrialization, the whole point of exploration was to go out and find markets for these luxury goods to improve the life of Europe. We're kind of turning that on its head. Now what we're doing is we're going out and seeking raw materials. For example, a big place for Great Britain was to go to India and get cotton. In the past, they would go to India and they would buy finished cloth. They would buy cotton that had already been woven. Now what they're doing is they are going to India and getting raw cotton and taking it back to Great Britain, where they will actually spin it in their factories. So what I need you guys to underline and circle or whatever here is how this is kind of a reversal of how it was before. This is reversing the trend. And this is going to create a huge economic advantage for Europeans, because now what they're doing is they're importing the raw materials and they're exporting the finished goods. And we know that luxury goods are always more expensive than the raw materials. So it's going to allow European nations to accumulate more wealth. So eventually what they're going to try to do, European nations, is try to gain colonies to get these raw materials. They are going to begin to conquer in these areas and create full-fledged empires. What we're going to see is our European nations are going to invest tons and tons of resources into these colonies, into excursions going into the interior of Africa and Asia. So like we talked about in the Atlantic slave trade, about how Europeans just kind of hung out on the coast because they were afraid of going into the interior. Now that you have steam-powered ships and you have railroads, you can navigate these rivers that you could not previously. So it's going to allow Europeans to infiltrate these areas that they'd kind of been kept out of before. Okay, so there are several reactions to this process of empire building. Some nations like the United States, Russia, Germany, and Japan start to industrialize on their own. But what's important to note here, and I need you guys to put a star or underline it, just really draw a lot of attention to it, is that this industrialization was state-sponsored. The government wanted the power that comes with industrialization. In all 4 of these examples, the government is going to promote industrialization. We talked about this before. We see this with the United States with the process of building the railroads. Japan's going to create monopolies on certain industries. And another example of this, well, never mind. The countries that were too slow to industrialize end up getting taken over by Europe. It kind of goes with this idea of social Darwinism: only the strong survive, and the strongest countries are the ones that are going to expand. And not only do you see this with Europeans taking over their neighbors, but you'll see this with both Russia and the United States and their expansion to the Pacific Ocean. We have the United States idea of manifest destiny and how they continue to take lands from the Native Americans and the Spanish to expand American lands, and the Russians are going to expand east to the Pacific Ocean. One thing that's pretty interesting here is that the speed of this mass-produced items, the speed of industrialization, is going to make it possible for Europe to take over places that they wouldn't have dreamed of even a couple generations before. 50, 100 years before, Europe would have never thought about taking on somewhere like China and dominating it. But now that they've industrialized, they have the resources and the capabilities of manipulating and exploiting China. Um, for instance, in 1792, England sends the McCarthy mission over to China, which they try to open China up to foreign trade. And China says, no, we don't want any of that. We're good. And then it's 40 years later that Great Britain defeats China through the Opium Wars and gains access into China with the Treaty of Nanjing, which gives England Hong Kong until 1999. So China is a perfect example of how you have a European country that England goes into China, somewhere they never would have bothered with 50, 100 years before. Okay, so why is this important? Well, because countries like Britain and the Dutch are going to go from controlling these small coastal cities, like the British did in India and the Dutch in Indonesia, and they're going to take full political control of these areas. I want you to underline these examples. These are the two most shining examples from this region, is the British taking control of India and the Dutch exerting their influence in Indonesia. And the Dutch are gonna, we've talked before about how they're kind of different from Great Britain and their methods of conquering, and they have a much more violent takeover of this entire island chain, in Indonesia. So make sure you guys emphasize these two, the British in India and the Dutch in Indonesia, as examples. Okay, so we're going to use India as our kind of case study for transoceanic empire building. And India is going to go from this trading colony of Great Britain to being the jewel in the British Empire's crown. And what this means is that the British see India as their most profitable colony. It has the largest population for them to sell finished goods. It has abundant raw materials. This is where they're going to get some tea, they're going to get cotton, they're going to get opium. All of these things end up being hugely important down the road. Okay, so hopefully you guys remember the Mughal Empire, which is one of our Islamic gunpowder empires. If you remember, the leaders were Muslim, the majority of the people are Hindu. It is the Mughals that are going to build the Taj Mahal, and they're kind of the golden age of India. During this time, we talked about Emperor Akbar, who is kind of their really tolerant emperor. Pretty much he's there through the golden age of India. But the Mughal Empire is declining by time period 5. The central authority has kind of lost power, and as what usually happens when you see basically when you sense blood with a central power, you're gonna have outlying powers that are going to try and challenge it, and that's exactly what happens in India. These outlying area rulers, called the Nawabs, are going to try and exert more control. They're going to try and take more control over the subcontinent, and the Nawabs are the local prince. So out by the Nawabs, put like Indian ruler, so you know that they're they're kind of controlling the areas out here around the exterior. The Nawab, it just means Indian ruler. They're kind of a local prince, and technically they do owe their allegiance to the Mughals. But by this point, the Mughal Empire is basically done. Like, he doesn't really have a lot of political power outside of the central state. So the Nawabs are going to try and take control of things themselves. And one way that they do this is they open up relations with the British East India Company. And by the British East India Company, well, you write EIC, so we can use that abbreviation and cut down on our writing. So, EIC for the British East India Company. So, what happens is the British East India Company makes these agreements with the Nawabs. Initially, what the EIC is interested in is textiles. They're trying to get some cloth out of India to send back to Britain, and the Nawabs promised them textiles in exchange for military support. And what's interesting here is that the Nawabs allow the EICs to collect land taxes in return. So they're going to allow the EIC to collect land taxes. And basically the EIC are tax farmers. So what's going on if you have a tax farmer is that basically you might have a ruler that needs some taxes collected, but he doesn't really have a centralized bureaucracy to take care of that for him. So like in the United States, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, takes care of the taxes, and that's what we do. That's how our country's set up, and we have that bureaucracy to take care of it. Well, if you don't have that, what you might do is that you might contract with what's called a tax farmer to collect the taxes for you. And they'll actually pay you for the privilege of collecting the taxes, because usually they're going to ask for more than what you've demanded as a central ruler, and the tax farmers get to keep the extras for themselves. Naturally, this is, as you can imagine, this is not a great system. It's going to lead to a lot of corruption, obviously. I mean, the whole system in and of itself sounds like a recipe for disaster, and it's going to lead to the peasants being crushed underfoot. Poor peasants. Okay, so initially the EIC, their focus is trade. The EIC is a joint stock company that's focused on looking for trade. And what I need you to underline here is that it's protected by the British government. The British government is going to give the EIC a trade monopoly in India, which means that no one else can trade in India unless you're with the EIC. The EIC is going to collect taxes, and they make some reforms. It's not all bad. We kind of had this idea with imperialism that everything's bad. But they do make some reforms, some progressive reforms. They get rid of the sati, which is something that's from like way, way back, time period 1 or time period 2, early days of Hinduism. And what it says is basically like an upper caste Hindu woman would allow herself to be burned on the funeral pyre of her husband. So it's pretty barbaric rituals, and the Europeans are going to outlaw this. So we do have some social reforms. They get rid of some of those ancient, more barbaric tactics. The EIC is going to depend on the Nawabs and the sepoys for support, which means that they have to respect Indian customs. Now the sepoys are interesting because they are an Indian soldier. They could be either Hindu or Muslim, doesn't really matter. And they've been recruited and they're serving as an EIC soldier. This is pretty interesting because the EIC, it's the East India Company, so it's a corporation, which means that it's privately held. But it has its own army. So it would kind of be like, Apple is a big corporation. Google is a big corporation. But last time I checked, they don't have their own military to protect their interest. So it's pretty weird that the EIC has their own military. But what they did with the sepoys is these are Indian, I would almost say they're almost like mercenaries. Indian soldiers that are dressed and trained as though they are British troops. Make sure that you guys put a little star by the sepoys because they're pretty important. They're a pretty weird thing from this time period. And initially this arrangement is going to work pretty well. in the beginning. It's a mutually beneficial relationship for these guys, but as the balance of power shifts in favor of the British over time, tensions increase. And the first issue here is the beef and pork fat issue. This is what's kind of seen as the spark, as the Sepoy Rebellion or Sepoy Mutiny. There's several different names for this event, but it's a critical event in the British imperialism of India. Okay, so in the old days, if you wanted to load a gun, what happened is that you'd have like a little container that would have the gunpowder in it, and it would be sealed, and you have to open it and pack the gunpowder down and load it down into your gun, and then you fire it. Well, because it's containing gunpowder, you usually want it to be waterproof, so you don't destroy the gunpowder. So this rumor spreads through the sepoys that the cartridges that they use for their guns have been greased with beef and pork fat. And this is a giant issue because Muslims don't eat pork and Hindus don't eat beef. So to have to put this fat of these animals in your mouth is just a huge deal for the sepoys. They're not going to do it. So this is kind of what's seen as the spark of the issue. The real issue behind this is the issue of the racism and the British superiority complex. The British think of themselves as culturally, intellectually, and in every way superior to the Indians. They kind of see them as this backwards, kind of barbaric culture. And the sepoys take real issue with this, as I think most people would. So what they do is they rebel against the bad treatment by the British foreigners. When they refuse the cartridges, some of them are jailed. Like 85 of the 90 sepoys are put in jail, and it sparks a big, big, long protest. It lasts for about a year. It takes over a year for the British East India Company to regain control of India. It's a very violent rebellion. Both sides are pretty violent towards each other. There's some horror stories from both sides of the account, from both the sepoys and the British side, so it's not a real good event. And as this is going on, the East India Company becomes concerned about losing control of India. So what the British government does is they decide to step in and actually take over India. So if you see here, these darker green areas from Calcutta up to Delhi, and kind of here on the coast, the southern part of India, these are originally British controlled areas. Your Sepoy Mutiny is up here in the north, but when that ends, the entire subcontinent comes under control of the British. So the Sepoy Mutiny is going to lead to British exerting political control in India. It's not just left to the East India Company anymore. The British takes full control. And here are some of the images from the East India Company. You can see these are battle scenes. This is one of the Sikh soldiers. So once Britain takes control of India, they're going to hold it as a colony for about 100 years. They hold it from 1857 to 1947. And they take control to protect their economic interest. They need the cotton to fuel their factories in Great Britain. And they need the opium to basically control China. What we'll get to soon is how Great Britain uses the poppy seeds from India to basically import a stronger strain of opium into China, and in return, Britain is going to get a lot of silver. So the main British economic interest is going to be cotton and opium. And while this is going on, Queen Victoria of Britain is going to become the Empress of India. And India is going to be the main source of cotton for English textile mills. And this is kind of where India becomes the jewel in the British crown. Great Britain is going to be able to import massive amounts of cotton, raw cotton, from India. And in return, they're going to sell back finished goods. This is a reversal of the previous arrangement. Previously, Great Britain had been buying finished cloths from India, and this is going to really destroy the local industries in India. The local handmade weavers cannot compete with the mechanization of the textile industry in Britain, and it's going to destroy this community. Okay, so let's talk about the good and the bad. There are some good things that come from British control of India. They are going to improve the hospitals. They're going to bring Western medicine in. They're going to improve transportation. Great Britain's going to set up the third largest rail network in the world by the time they leave India. So they improve transportation, create railroads, create roads. They improve communication in India. They bring Western education into the subcontinent, so they're being educated in like Enlightenment ideas, more access to education for the population. The Britain's going to improve the laws and safety. They're going to get rid of some of the old customs, and as they do that, they're going to improve the status of women in India just a little bit. Like when they got rid of the sati, getting rid of some of those older traditions is going to improve the status of women in India. However, they're going to make some things a lot worse. Britain is going to take away India's self-determination. India is not going to be able to make any decisions basically for themselves. They are under complete control of the British. The British completely ignore Indian habits and customs. Going back to this idea of superiority, the British just see themselves as culturally superior. They don't respect the religions, they don't respect the local customs of India, and it's going to fuel some racist attitudes. And with this, the British create some glass ceilings in India. All of like the top level government bureaucratic positions are going to go to British citizens, regardless of their education or their qualifications. Just by virtue of the fact that they are a white man, they're going to be afforded more opportunities than the Indians are. So they set up this glass ceiling that Indian citizens are not able to penetrate. The top positions are going to go to the Europeans. Great Britain's going to exploit India's economy. They're extracting raw materials, sending them back their finished products, destroying the local industries. And these racism and this economic imperialism is going to increase Indian feelings of nationalism. And nationalism we talked about a little bit last week, and it's going to become more prevalent. We're going to look more at it, hopefully. Cross your fingers, limited snow days, we'll look more at it and how it shapes other nations. But nationalism is this idea that you have a feeling of identity with a common group of people who you would call the nation. And it could be the Navajo Nation, or it could be the United States, or it could be the Indian nation. The British here are going to use a method of indirect rule. We'll talk soon about how the French are going to use direct rule in contrast. With direct rule, you're trying to push your culture on these people. Every position of authority is held by an imperialist, but with indirect rule, you have some limited self-rule. Of course, the highest level positions are going to go to the Europeans, but many of your lower level and mid-level administrative offices are going to go to Indians. So the goal is to kind of create some autonomy with indirect rule. Your goal here is to, they do have some limited self-rule, blended customs, which is going to allow for a middle class to rise in India. And as you have a middle class, the rise of a middle class, you're going to have increased education, increased opportunities. So this new Indian bureaucracy is going to be educated in Western political values from the Enlightenment. This is going to be somewhat problematic for Britain because if you're taking your imperialist subjects and educating them in Enlightenment ideas like liberty, equality, and justice, there's going to be a little bit of a contradiction. How can you hold these values that each man is created equal, that you have rights that of personal freedoms and equality before the law, while you're controlling another man? So it's going to, it's going to get under the skin of these people. It's a nagging idea that eventually is going to lead several Indians to start to protest against the British. And one of the big guys with this is a man named Ramon Roy, and I want you to emphasize, just circle Roy. He's a key figure in the early days of India's kind of modernization and push for independence. And he says that India has to modernize, they've got to keep up with the times, they have to get rid of their old ways like the caste system. But the problem here is that it's kind of an upper class movement. Only the educated, the wealthier are really buying into it. And he forms in the 1880s the Indian National Congress, which initially wants to kind of push for unity for the Indians, to push for reforms and modernization. But eventually the INC is going to move towards full-fledged independence. They're going to start to push for full independence, political, economic, from Great Britain. However, it's mainly an upper class movement. Like I said, it's hard to get the lower classes to buy into this. They're mostly uneducated. They've been living with these traditions for, a millennia. So Roy does not have the support from the average uneducated Indians until a man named Mohandas Gandhi comes along. And one of the things that Gandhi is most famous for is creating this message of unity of all Indians and a desire for independence among all Indians. And what Gandhi's going to be really successful at and well known for is being able to take this message of independence to the masses. So he's going to be the one that's kind of pushing that allows India to actually gain their independence from Great Britain after World War II. And here you see, this is just the first Indian National Congress. So the big takeaway, and I wanted to use Britain as an example, is because Britain is one of the most famous trans-oceanic empires. Probably familiar with this saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire, which comes from this time period. And it's because Great Britain, because of their industrialization, they are going to be able to conquer more areas than basically any other nation. If you guys have any questions, bring them with you next time that we meet, and we will move on from there.